So, in honor of the ending of this episode, I'm just going to review the whole episode wearing this helmet. Oh, okay.
No, actually, that's going to be really stuffy. I'm not going to do that. Ooh, helmet hair. All right, I'm going to put this right here, and we are going to review the latest episode of Star Wars The Acolyte, this time episode 6, titled Teach/Corrupt? Might be Corrupt/Teach. It's one of those two. Man, this show loves its double titles, though it does choose when to split them up, because last 2 episodes were day/night, but then we've had like double up episode titles as well. So I don't know. It's interesting when they choose to do that and when they don't, because I really don't feel like the day/night combination worked as well. Like, night worked really well. Day, less so, fit the title of that episode. So this one works a little bit better with the sort of teach/corrupt motif. But well, let's just start at the beginning and get into this episode. Speaking overall on this one, this brings me back to basically like 2 episodes ago with the episode Day, where there's a lot I like in terms of the ideas being presented in the episode, but I'm ultimately just frustrated, not even necessarily at the execution going on here, but just the pacing, because the show has been teasing for a very long time, especially with the character of Soul. I think for several episodes now, even going all the way back to episode, I think 3, where we got the flashback, that they're going to tell us more of what's going on with the history of May and Osha, what happened to their family, and all of the stuff that happened there. And yet we still don't get it this episode. We get more futzing around, despite Soul having said for the last 2 episodes, he's going to tell us everything. And it kind of is starting to play with this idea of May being with Soul and sort of being under a Jedi, and Osha being with Kamir under this Sith guy. And it seems like it wants to play with these two concepts of, ooh, they've traded places. They're sort of having to be presented with new ideologies. And we get some of that. I think most of it, the interesting stuff with Osha and Kamir. Hello, buddy. My cat is yelling for me. But for the most part, it's not really. It just feels like we're puttering about for a whole episode. And considering we only have 2 more episodes left, and we still, and I'm figuring the next episode is going to be pretty much just Soul telling us a repeat of the story from episode 3, but from his perspective and giving us new context. I'm just sort of like, we have so much more left to go it feels like, to explore with a lot of these ideas and concepts and plot, that I just want to get going on that, and we're really just not. And so this episode just feels frustrating in that it doesn't do a lot with its setup of these 2 characters having traded places, and eventually just leads us to a place where I wanted to be by the end of this episode, which is knowing the history of what was going on. So I'm really just frustrated at the pacing of this. Bringing some of it down, I said the most interesting part is Kamir and Osha. And I do like some of their discussions that we have going on here. And sort of Kamir arguing with her about, like, hey, like the Jedi tell you that there's only this one way, and there's deeper emotions that you can pull from, and arguing about how the Jedi are always very closed off with their emotions. I mean, the Jedi, as we know from the prequels, are sort of shunt out, caring for others and connection, and Kamir sort of points out, like, why do you put your love in people who can only reciprocate so much, and how she cares seemingly more for Soul over her own sister by asking about him first, but then also just knowing that there's a limit to what they can give to her. And a lot of this is intriguing, but frankly, none of it is really new. For stuff that we have seen dark side people, and particularly Palpatine with Anakin in the prequels, argue before. The dark side is a pathway to many abilities, some consider it unnatural. You need to follow the anger and hatred. Like, these are all concepts that the dark side users have expressed before. And what I kind of want is a deeper, like, the whole point of this show, it has been argued, is to focus on the Sith and focus on their ideology. And we've gotten hints of cool new ways of rethinking about the dark side, like going back to episode 3 with the witches and their sort of idea of, like, we think about the power of 2, and the Jedi consider us dark side, but we don't really see things in that binary. Like, that's a cool concept. And I wanted that from Khmer, even if he is expressing the sort of ideology of the Sith, which is about power and wanting the freedom to control. Basically, he wants the freedom to use his power as he sees fit, as he said last episode, but his power is to dominate and control or to enact violence against others. And I wanted, at least, and that's what I'm presuming. I'm kind of presuming that. But we don't really get an actual expressed version of that. You know, we don't get an actual exploration of what he believes truly. It's more of this attempt to like corrupt Osha, but using rhetoric that we've heard before. And I want this show to go deeper. It has such cool ideas, such cool setups. I love this idea of like, oh, you're going to have a good side user be pulled to the dark side and vice versa. And they're twins. And so they have the similar context of growing up. So they can kind of pull from different, they have a similar basis that we can understand these characters from, and yet they're pulled in different directions. All of this is interesting to me. It's phenomenal. But they don't go deep enough with it. And that is what is frustrating me here. Because these concepts are intriguing, but they don't go deeper. And this is doubly so for the Soul and May stuff. We putz around for forever with this, like, we have the tracker guy who's going after May, who kind of knows that's May, the little little cute little animal dude, and her finding Gizmo, who she resets to factory settings, which broke my heart, by the way, because I am of the persuasion that droids are sentient, and when you do that, you're basically murdering them. Not a fan of it at all. But that's a whole other discussion for personality and memory. That's a whole other philosophical field that we don't have time to get into. But regardless, like, all of that stuff is like, okay, this is fine. This is set up for her being discovered. But then the tracker guy doesn't even really set her up to be discovered. Like, Soul kind of figures it out on his own. And we get this one conversation between the two of them of her being like, oh, the Jedi didn't allow me to explore myself. I didn't know it at the time, but I didn't allow me to explore myself. Again, an interesting idea. Especially when Soul thinks that it's Osha expressing that. But it's again very superficial and not explored in depth, mostly because May is not Osha and she can't really express these things. That's what sort of leads to Soul suspecting her and not believing that she's actually Osha, which is interesting to me because it's like, but Osha I feel like might express these feelings. So if that is what is making you suspect her. It's weird that you're suspecting her for expressing these emotions that I think would be very legitimate for Osha to express to Soul. So it just doesn't make sense for him to get suspicious. And yes, there's some other stuff with the tracker and things like that, but it just doesn't flow as easily as I think it might. And even more so, it dilutes the power of what these questions being raised could say. Because what would it mean for Soul to be confronted with Osha saying something like that? Even if Osha wouldn't necessarily express it, but May is saying it for Osha, and Soul being confronted with that, what would that mean? But ultimately, Soul is not really confronted with it because he realizes that it's May. And I would rather have him wrestled with that more, have the episode go into that more, but really it just comes at the very end of the episode, and we spend more time futzing about with this, like, oh, look, it's the goofy little Star Wars stuff happening. That just... It frustrates me. That is ultimately my biggest frustration here, is that there are cool ideas and setups here that they just do not explore deep enough. And I am certainly someone who loves philosophy. Like, if you just want to have a Star Trek or Star Wars episode that's just characters sitting down and philosophizing about stuff, I am here for that. And I'm sure there are some people who would be very angry at a Star Wars episode doing that, and being like, oh, this isn't Star Trek, do Star Wars, like action and stuff like we got last episode, which I loved. But this episode just touches the surface of this philosophy, of these ideas, and doesn't delve deeper, and it wastes its time, and it frustrates me because there are good concepts here, and I just want more of it. And I'll end on this last point here, because I'm ultimately just repeating myself, and this will be a repeat of something I've said in other videos too, but it angers me that this is the show that, I mean, every Star Wars show has incited the angry mob bullshit people, the anger merchants and anger peddlers, whatever, the anti-woke brigade. Every Star Wars show does, because Star Wars is this cultural zeitgeist thing that is easy to press upon their culture war bullshit onto. But this one has so specifically gotten that ire. And I think it is because, in large part, the show is trying to grapple with these themes of, like, questioning the Jedi, questioning these institutions that many of these people are like, you can't question the Jedi, you can't question my childhood, you can't question nostalgia, you can't question this allegory for American institutions, you can't do that. We need our myths, we need our hero's journey myths. And so the show aims to do that, and I see why it incites their anger, because they all these things are things that they uphold and want to, like, never question, especially through the white supremacist bullshit that they often obfuscate it through. And I love that the show is challenging him on that, and fuck them. But I wish if this show was going to be doing that, it would do so with more just go deeper. I want you to go deeper. And so if you're gonna bring up these interesting questions, you're gonna piss off these people, not that you need to acquiesce to them in any way, shape, or form. Fuck them, like I say, but, like, force them to really reckon with these thoughts and really reckon with these ideals. And the fact that the show is not exploring those things gives those people ammo. And again, fuck them. You're not supposed to appease them. Don't care about them. But, like, it just is frustrating to me that we're not going there when we have the opportunity to do so. And I think that's ultimately going to be my end thought on the series. Like, this is such a show that has so much potential and it has great moments. Last episode, fantastic. And honestly, I think some of the ideology expressed in last week's episode was deeper than this one. Like the stuff where Kamir says, like, where Sol said, you killed the child, and Kamir says, you're the one that brought her here. That's a really interesting question of the Jedi institution, of, like, how they bring children, they take children and bring them into dangerous situations because it's just part of the way the system works, and numerous other things. And we don't get that here. It's just lesser. And despite the fact that this episode has more time to do so. We also get some other stuff too. I should mention the Jedi green lady who's in charge of stuff. Again, there's some interesting ideas presented there. Like we see the little hologram of the senator guy saying, like, oh, look, the Jedi have always been forthcoming with the senators. This guy is just fear-mongering nonsense. Interesting idea, because clearly this Jedi lady is lying to him. So the Jedi are not forthcoming. Again, questioning the Jedi institution in a really interesting way. But again, that's it. That's the full extent of that concept, rather than going any deeper with it. And we see her go and explore Kofar, which, and now they're suspecting Sol might be the Sith, which I'm curious to see how that's going to go. It's going to, like, oh, mistaken identities. I always hate mistaken identities plot lines, so that's its own whole thing. We'll get there when we get there. The only other concept that intrigued me was we do see the planet that Kamir and Osha are on is this sort of, like, rock planet. And it especially states that this is an unknown planet. And it's interesting to me that it looks very, very similar to the planet that Luke Skywalker is on in the sequels, where we know it has, like, the sacred Jedi text and the tree and a Jedi temple, but there's also that sort of dark side pit that Rey goes into at one point in that movie. So if this does turn out to be that planet, which I doubt it might not be, because we don't see the porgs. There's these other little creatures there, but maybe it possibly could be. That would be interesting to me, to see, like, oh, this Sith guy is hanging out on a planet that would later be, taken over by the Jedi as a temple, and Luke Skywalker can hang out on, and that causes him doubt. Like, there's interesting ideas there. Again, I don't really trust the show to explore it with any depth, but conceptually, that's a cool idea, and I found that interesting. We'll see what they do with it. Okay, that's enough of this rant. I hope you all disagree with me. Maybe you all seeing more than I do, but that's ultimately my frustration, is I like the show's ideas. This is a show, this is honestly, like, as much as I love Andor, like, Andor is my favorite Star Wars thing, period. That is a show that's, like, very revolutionary and focused on, like, communism and fascism and anarchism and fighting and rebellion. Like, those are all ideas I love. But personally, on a personal level, I'm always more interested in, like, this deep philosophy rather than, like, historical depictions of revolutionary movements. Find both of those things fascinating, but I just, as a person, I'm here for Star Trek people in conference rooms. So conceptually, this would be the show for me, even over Andor, which is a show that I love, but it's just not executing it in a way that I think Andor did to perfection with what it was trying to do with this sort of more historical, revolutionary history vibes. Anyways, that's my thoughts. Love to hear yours. Let me know down in the comments what you think, and I hope y'all live long and prosper.